I've added this new thing to my live show. A new channel that I've got. I've already got 3 videos up on it. Wiki Wasteland. And you should definitely subscribe if you're watching from Wiki Wasteland. Like, congratulations, you found this hidden channel. And I'm just going to jump right into it. This is the early history of video games, and I'm going to read it to you, man. The history of video games spans... I need to... Hold on. I need to zoom in on this, man. How do I do that? Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. No. There needs to be a zoom in function directly built in, I think. Anyway, let's read this history of video games. Early history of video games. The history of video games spans a period of time between the invention of the first electronic games and today, covering many inventions and developments. Video gaming reached mainstream popularity in the early 1970s when arcade video games, gaming consoles, and personal computer games were introduced to the general public. Since then, video gaming has become a popular form of entertainment and a part of modern culture in most parts of the world. The early history of video games, therefore, covers the period of time between the first interactive electronic game with an electronic display in 1947, the first true video games in the early 1950s, and the rise of early personal computer and arcade video games in the 1970s, followed by Pong. Hey, I know Pong. Played a lot of Pong, and you could have the overlays on the screen. In the beginning of the first generation of video game consoles with the Magnavox Odyssey, that's exactly what the Magnavox was, in 1972. During this time, there was a wide range of devices and inventions corresponding with large advances in computing technology, and the actual first video game is dependent on the definition of video game use. Commonly, video games are defined as those using a cathode ray tube, CRT, for display. I got a CRT TV over there. Distinguishing them from earlier electronic games using lights. Following the 1947 invention of the cathode ray tube amusement device, the earliest known interactive electronic game, as well as the first to use an electronic display, the first true video games were created in the early 1950s. Initially created as technology demonstrations, video games also became the purview of academic research. A series of games generally simulating real-world board games were created at various research institutions to explore programming, human-computer interaction, and computer algorithms. These include Sandy Douglas, OXO, Christopher Strachey's, I don't know how to pronounce that name, Checkers, and Stanley Gill's Sheep and Gates, all 1952. The first software-based games to incorporate a cathode ray tube display and several chess and checkers programs. Well, yeah, those obviously were going to be the original ones. Possibly the first video game created simply for entertainment was 1958's Tennis for Two, featuring moving graphics on an oscilloscope. I think that's how you pronounce that. I've never seen that word before. Oscilloscope. It's a oscilloscope. As computing technology improved over time, computers became smaller and faster, and the ability to work on them was opened up to university employees and undergraduate students by the end of the 1950s. These new programmers began to create games for non-academic purposes, leading up to the 1962 release of Space War. They were just having fun, man, as one of the earliest known digital computer games to be available outside a single research institute. Dude, college kids, they be bored, man. So they'd be creating video games, they'd be creating social media platforms. Throughout the rest of the 1960s, increasing numbers of programmers wrote digital computer games, which were sometimes sold commercially in catalogs. As the audience for video games expanded to more than a few dozen research institutions, with the falling cost of computers and programming languages that would run on multiple types of computers were created, a wider variety of games began to be developed. Video games transitioned into a new era in the early 1970s with the launch of the commercial video game industry in 1971 with the release of the first arcade video game, Computer Space, and then in 1972 with the release of the immensely successful arcade game Pong, and the first home video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, which launched the first generation of video game consoles. I've had the Magnavox Odyssey before, back when I was collecting video games. Defining the video game. The term video game has evolved over the decades from a purely technical definition to a general concept defining a new class of interactive entertainment. Technically, for a product to be a video game under early definitions, it needed to transmit a video signal to a display. This can, but not always, include a cathode ray tube (CRT), oscilloscope, liquid crystal display, vector scan monitor, etc. This definition would preclude early computer games that outputted results to a printer or teletype rather than a display, as well as games that use static LCD graphics, for example, Nintendo's Game & Watch. Yeah, did that count? What's your standard for what a video game is? Or most Tiger Electronics handhelds? I'd probably say those aren't real video games. Those are basically just scams, but they're cool to collect. From a technical standpoint, these would more properly be called electronic games or computer games. Today, the term video game has completely shed its purely hardware-dependent definition and encompasses a wider range of technology. While still rather ill-defined, the term video game now generally encompasses any game played on hardware built with electronic logic circuits that incorporates an element of interactivity and outputs the result of the player's actions to a display. Going by this broader definition, the first video games appeared in the early 1950s. They were tied largely to research projects at universities and large corporations, though, and had little influence on each other due to, I said though weird, and had little influence on each other due to their primary purpose as academic and promotional devices rather than entertainment games. The ancestors to these games include the cathode ray tube amusement device, the earliest known interactive electronic game, as well as the first to incorporate a cathode ray tube screen. The player simulates an artillery shell trajectory on a CRT screen connected to an oscilloscope with a set of knobs and switches. Hey, I think I know. I think I've seen this before. If I didn't want this to be like hours long, or if I did want this to be hours long, I'd put all that stuff in with a set of knobs and switches. The device usually uses purely analog electronics and does not use any digital computer or memory device or execute a program. It was patented by Thomas T. Goldsmith Jr. and Estill Ray Mann. Those are some names, man. In 1947. While the idea behind the game was potentially to use a television set as a display and thus sell the invention to consumers, as Goldsmith and Mann worked at television designer Dumont Laboratories, the patent, the first for an electronic game, was never used and the device never manufactured beyond the original handmade prototypes. Oh man, if somebody can get their hands on those. This, along with the lack of electronic logic circuits, keeps the device from being considered the first video game. In 1948, shortly after the patenting of this device, Alan Turing, probably popularized by the Turing test, is that the same guy? And David Champernone, I'm going to go with that, Champernone. There you go, champ. Developed the earliest known written computer game, a chess simulation called Turochamp. Oh, I've heard of that. Okay. Though it was never actually implemented on a computer as the code was too complicated to run on the machines of the time. Turing tested the code in a game in 1952. I think I learned something about this because of Ex Machina. That movie mentioned something about it, or something about the movie mentioned something about it on like a YouTube channel or something. I don't know. It seems very familiar. In 1952, where he mimicked the operation of the code in a real chess game against an opponent, but was never able to run the program on a computer. Initial games. The first electronic digital computers, Colossus and ENIAC, were built during World War II to aid the Allied war effort. Shortly after the war, the promulgation of the first stored program architectures, these are some big words, at the University of Manchester, Manchester Mark I, University of Cambridge, EDSAC, the University of Pennsylvania, EDVAC, and Princeton University, IAS machine, of course, it's IAS, I don't know, IAS, as a bad name, allowed computers to be easily reprogrammed to undertake a variety of tasks, which facilitated commercializing computers in the early 1950s by companies like Remington Rand, Ferranti, and IBM. IBM, I know. I don't know who the other two people are, or the other two companies. This in turn promoted the adoption of computers by universities, government organizations, and large corporations as the decade progressed. It was in this environment that the first video games were born. Anything to make a buck, am I right? That's really why they were made at the end of the day, was to sell stuff. The computer games of the 1950s can generally be divided into three categories: training and instructional programs, research programs in fields such as artificial intelligence, and demonstration programs intended to impress or entertain the public. Because these games were largely developed on unique hardware in a time when porting between systems was difficult and were often dismantled or discarded after serving their limited purposes, they did not generally influence further developments in the industry. For the same reason, it is impossible to be certain who developed the first computer game or who originally modeled many of the games or play mechanics introduced during the decade, as there are likely several games from this period that were never publicized and are thus unknown today. I really just want to know what the biggest, public game was that wasn't really the commercial game. Earliest known publicly demonstrated. Well, here we go. Exactly what I was asking for. The earliest known publicly demonstrated electronic game was created in 1950. Birdie the Brain was an arcade game of tic-tac-toe built by Joseph Cates for the 1950 Canadian National Exhibition. To showcase his new miniature vacuum tube, the Adatron tube, he designed a specialized computer to use it. What is this, some like Fallout shit? Which he built with the assistance of engineers from Rogers Majestic. The large metal computer, which was 4 meters tall, could only play tic-tac-toe on a light bulb-backed display and was installed in the engineering building at the Canadian National Exhibition from August 25th to September 9th, 1950. The game was a success at the 2-week exhibition, with attendees lining up to play it as Cates adjusted the difficulty up and down for players. After the exhibition, Birdie the Brain was dismantled and largely forgotten as a novelty. Cates has said that he was working on so many projects at the same time that he had no energy to spare for preserving it, despite its significance. Dude, that's so sad. Game preservation has just been lost on us from the beginning. A year later, on May 5th, 1951, the Nimrod computer, created by engineering firm and nascent computer developer Ferranti, was presented at the Festival of Britain and then showcased for 3 weeks in October at the Berlin Industrial Show before being dismantled. Using a panel of lights for its display, it was designed exclusively to play the game of Nim. Never heard of it. Moves were made by players pressing buttons which corresponded with the lights. Nimrod could play either the traditional or reverse form of the game. The machine was 12 feet wide, 9 feet deep, and 5 feet tall. That's pretty big. It was based on an earlier Nim playing machine, Nimitron, designed by Edward Condon, I don't know, and built by Westington House Electric in 1940 for display at the New York World's Fair. Nimitron had been constructed from electromechanical relays and weighed over a ton. Man, these words making it hard. I'm stumbling over them. The Nimrod was primarily intended to focus Ferranti's computer design and programming skills rather than entertain, and was not followed up by any future games. Despite this, most of the onlookers at the Festival of Britain were more interested in playing the game than in the programming and engineering logic behind it. Around this time, games were being developed at various research computer laboratories, including early examples with visual displays. One notable program was Christopher Strachey's Checkers, also known as Draughts, initially developed for the pilot Ace, which he unsuccessfully attempted to run for the first time in July 1951 at the British National Physical Laboratory and completed in 1952 using a cathode ray tube to display cathode ray tube display to show the board. Checkers was the first known computer game to be created for a general purpose computer rather than a machine specifically made for the game like Birdie the Brain. So right here, this is the first one we have recorded. was checkers. Strachey's program inspired Arthur Samuel to develop his own checkers game in 1952 for the IBM 701. Successive iterations developed rudimentary artificial intelligence by 1955. So around 1955 is when we really started to see AI popping up, and it was because of video games. And a version was shown on television in 1956. Also in 1951, Dietrich Prinz, Dietrich, I'm just going to call him Prince, wrote the first limited program of chess for the University of Manchester's general purpose Ferranti Mark I computer, one of the first commercially available computers. Oh, I think I should have known that. I probably heard that at some point and forgot, because I know a lot about the history of computers. The program was only capable of computing mate and two problems, as it was not powerful enough to play a full game, and it had no video output. Another early visual game was Sandy Douglas's OXO, a tic-tac-toe implementation on the University of Cambridge's EDSAC computer that used a CRT to display an interactive grid, demonstrating real-time graphical interaction. Around the same time, in the early 1950s, military research organizations like the RAND Corporation developed a series of combat simulation games. Of course, that's going to be the next step. We go to military, of increasing complexity, such as the 1948 Air Defense Simulation developed by the Army Operations Research Office at Johns Hopkins University in 1948. It was followed by the Carmanet Combined Arms Computer Model series beginning in 1953, featuring ground combat at the levels of the individual soldier and company, and expanded through the 1970s. Hutspiel, created in 1955, was a theater-level war game for an analog computer, also by the Operations Research Office. So military organizations basically just be making video games. The game was played by two people, red and blue, representing a war simulation between NATO and USSR forces, and was designed to study the use of tactical nuclear weapons and air support in Western Europe in the case of Soviet invasion. These simulations were not yet true video games, as they required human intervention to interpret the player's orders and the final results. The computer only controlled the paths that the enemies would take. I'm interested in this. I want to see stuff about this. I want to see somebody like play with this. I'm going to have to look it up later. And the programs were focused on simulating events and probabilities. Ooh, I think we're going to leave this off in episode 2 of this. So I will see y'all tomorrow.